In the midst of a brutal, grinding war where the news has been relentlessly grim, a single, audacious promise has just cut through the noise. From Washington, D.C., a declaration has been made that hopes to reshape the immediate future of the Middle East. We believe that a ceasefire will happen within the next week. Those were the stunning words from U.S. President Donald Trump, a statement sending shockwaves from the White House to the streets of Tel Aviv and Gaza. For nearly 2 years, this conflict has raged, leaving behind a trail of utter devastation. But now, with this one-week timeline suddenly on the table, the world is asking, is this a real shot at peace, or are we watching the setup for yet another bitter disappointment? President Donald Trump's assertion that a Gaza ceasefire is not just a possibility, but is actually imminent, has thrown American diplomacy into overdrive. Standing before reporters, Trump was all confidence, stating, "I think it's close. I just spoke to some of the people involved. We think within the next week we're going to get a ceasefire." This wasn't framed as a vague hope. It was presented as a firm belief, the result of some intense, behind-the-scenes deal-making. This bold statement didn't just come out of nowhere. It's on the heels of some supercharged diplomacy, including a recent and dramatic U.S. brokered ceasefire that pulled Israel and Iran back from the edge of a much wider regional war. That success seems to have emboldened the Trump administration, giving their efforts a new sense of momentum. The White House has reportedly been in constant contact with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, using its full influence to push for a deal. The urgency couldn't be clearer. The war, which was sparked by the horrific Hamas-led attack on October 7, 2023, has inflicted a staggering human toll. That first attack killed approximately 1,200 people in southern Israel and saw around 250 dragged into Gaza as hostages. The Israeli military campaign to destroy Hamas that followed has been devastating. According to the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza, the death toll in the Strip has now topped 56,000 Palestinians. A recent United Nations report paints an absolutely harrowing picture, stating that about 90% of Gaza's 2.1 million residents have been displaced. They're facing dire shortages of food, water, and medicine in dangerously overcrowded conditions. It's against this backdrop of incredible suffering that Trump's one-week ultimatum has landed. So, how do you achieve in 1 week what negotiators haven't been able to lock down for nearly 2 years? It's a monumental task. The heart of the negotiations is a complex, multi-phase agreement. It's a delicate dance of give and take, with mediators from the U.S., Egypt, and Qatar working around the clock to build a path toward a permanent end to the fighting. The latest proposals reportedly start with an initial truce, lasting somewhere between 40 and 60 days. In this first phase, the fighting would stop, and Israeli forces would pull back from populated areas in Gaza. In return, Hamas would release a specific group of hostages, the priority being women, children, the elderly, and the wounded who are still alive. For every Israeli hostage freed, Israel would then release a large number of Palestinian prisoners. But this is where things get really tricky. The biggest sticking point, the one that has blown up talks over and over, is what happens asterisk after asterisk that first phase. Hamas has been adamant, demanding a permanent ceasefire and a total withdrawal of all Israeli forces from the entire Gaza Strip. They see the remaining hostages, especially the male soldiers, as their ultimate bargaining chip and are terrified that Israel will just restart the war once the most vulnerable captives are back home. Hamas has also pushed for control over strategic areas like the Philadelphia corridor on the Egyptian border, which Israel insists on controlling to stop weapons smuggling. On the other side, Prime Minister Netanyahu's government is firm that its main war goal, the complete destruction of Hamas, must be achieved. They are flatly unwilling to accept any deal that leaves Hamas in power, with the ability to rearm and carry out another October 7th-style attack. This basic disagreement over the endgame of permanent truce versus eliminating Hamas is the giant gap that negotiators are now desperately trying to close. For President Donald Trump, This is a massive political gamble. If he pulls it off, it's a historic foreign policy win that perfectly fits his master dealmaker image and shows off American power on the world stage. But if it fails, it could be a spectacular flameout, making him look ineffective and unable to deliver on his promises. For Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the political math is even more dangerous. He's trapped. On one side, he's facing intense pressure from the families of the hostages and a large part of the Israeli public who are desperate to bring their loved ones home. Polls have consistently shown that most Israelis would support a deal, even if it meant ending the war. The streets of Israeli cities have been filled with mass protests demanding an agreement. But on the other side, Netanyahu's government depends on far-right parties who are completely against ending the war without a total victory over Hamas. Any deal that looks like a concession could bring down his government and possibly end his political career. Critics have accused him of dragging out the war for his own political survival. This political pressure box leaves him with very little room to negotiate, forcing him to keep up a hardline stance in public, even while mediators are pushing hard for a compromise. This conflict isn't happening in a bubble. It's the flashpoint of a much larger regional chess match, with major powers all competing for influence. The talks aren't just between Israel and Hamas. They're tangled up in the ambitions of Egypt, Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. A huge piece of the American strategy is expanding the Abraham Accords, the groundbreaking normalization deals between Israel and several Arab nations. The hope is that ending the Gaza war could open the door to a much bigger regional settlement, maybe even bringing Saudi Arabia into a peace agreement with Israel. Some reports even mention a sense of euphoria among American and Israeli leaders about a grand vision that includes ending the war, exiling Hamas's leadership, setting up joint Arab governance in Gaza, and getting an Israeli commitment to a future Palestinian state. However, key Arab nations have been clear they won't help rebuild or govern a post-war Gaza without a real, credible path to a two-state solution, a major point of conflict with Netanyahu's government. And while these grand strategies are debated in capital cities, the reality on the ground in Gaza is a humanitarian abyss. The United Nations and other aid agencies describe a situation of near-total collapse. Since a previous ceasefire broke down in March 2025, intense Israeli military operations have caused new waves of mass displacement. The UN reports that over 82% of the Gaza Strip is now either a militarized zone or under evacuation orders. The World Food Program has warned that Gaza is still on the verge of famine, with aid deliveries being dangerously insufficient. Access to clean water has collapsed for most of the population, and with sanitation systems overwhelmed, a massive public health crisis is unfolding. Hospitals are barely functioning, struggling with heavy damage and critical shortages of fuel and medical supplies. This is the devastating human cost that acts as the ticking clock behind this urgent diplomatic push. So, here we are, caught between a sliver of hope and a very harsh reality. President Trump's one-week timeline is incredibly ambitious, maybe even reckless. It's a powerful diplomatic shove meant to break a bloody and miserable stalemate. A framework for a deal does exist, built on months of painful work by mediators. But the core disagreements between Israel and Hamas are still massive, rooted in fundamental questions of security and survival. The political pressure on every leader involved is immense, creating a volatile situation where one wrong move could make the whole thing fall apart. The next few days will be a true test of diplomacy, political nerve, and courage. We're about to find out if this bold declaration was a brilliant move for peace that will finally silence the guns, or just another high-stakes promise that couldn't be kept. The fate of millions is hanging in the balance. What do you think? Is a ceasefire in Gaza really possible in 1 week? What are the biggest hurdles, and what would it take to finally get past them? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to stay on top of the world's most critical stories with in-depth analysis, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching.